Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few, US PI's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sherry delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and I have another great show for you. Joining me today is American political scientist and legal scholar, Dr. Carol Swain, a retired professor of political science and law at Vanderbilt University. Before I bring Dr. Swain on, please do me a favor. Give us a 5-star rating, subscribe to the show, and most importantly, share this episode with a friend. And don't forget to visit uspie.org to learn more and to join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. U.S. PI's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at US PI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. Today I'm joined by Dr. Carol Swain. She is an award-winning political scientist, a former professor of political science, and professor of law at Vanderbilt University, and a lifetime member of the James Madison Society, an international community of scholars affiliated with the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University. Before joining Vanderbilt in 1999, Dr. Swain was tenured associate professor of politics and public policy at Princeton University's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs. Dr. Swain is the author or editor of 8 books. Her first book, Black Faces, Black Interests, published by Harvard University Press, won the Woodrow Wilson Prize for the best book published in the U.S. on government, politics, and international affairs in 1994, and was cited twice by the United States Supreme Court. Last but not least, we are incredibly honored to have Dr. Swain appear in our documentary film, Truth and Lies in American Education. Dr. Swain, thank you for being on the podcast. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
Before we get started with our discussion, I'd like to play a short clip from our documentary film, Truth and Lies in American Education, where you talk about the 1619 Project. Let's watch.
Carol Swain, she's an African-American female intellectual, former college professor who cares so deeply about the accurate telling of American history that she is one of the creators of the 1776, the actual History of America program. When you've got people like that pushing on our side too, this is a battle unlike the ones in the past. This is one we can win.
The New York Times, in the summer of 2019, launched the 1619 Project that reimagined America in the sense that it had a different birth date for our nation. Instead of 1776 and the Declaration of Independence, it listed 1619, the year when the first Africans came to America. The project argued that racism is in the DNA of America, that America was birthed in racism, that the Revolutionary War was fought to maintain slavery, and all of that was a false narrative. President Trump signed an executive order setting up a commission, the 1776 Commission. Part of our purpose was to prepare for the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, which will take place in 2026. And it was to be a 2-year commission. And so we worked to produce a report that we released on January 18th, Martin Luther King's birthday. And 2 days later, President Biden eliminated our commission. Thousands of schools embraced that flawed curriculum that had been criticized by liberals as well as conservatives.
Okay, so you mentioned that President Biden eliminated the 1776 Commission. Do you think President Trump will pick that back up again?
He already has. In fact, America First had its own 1776, I'm not sure exactly what they called it, but it's pretty much a 1776 commission. And the commission that I was appointed as vice chair, that term has expired. And so, as we speak, there is a 1776 commission. I don't know if it's fully developed, but it will plan our nation's birthday.
Yes, I'm very excited to learn that the commission is active again, and I know that you and Larry Yarn with Hillsdale College put a lot of work into that, and it's so important with this anniversary of our country's founding. So I'm really happy to hear that that is back in place. So we'll look forward
It
to
is
hearing more about that.
definitely back in place.
Good news. Very good. So you speak openly about how difficult your upbringing was and how you dropped out of school after ninth grade, but went on to earn your criminal justice degree and master's in political science, eventually getting your PhD from USC Chapel Hill and another master's from Yale Law School. So what was your motivating factor to have you persevere all those years?
First of all, I dropped out of school after completing the eighth grade, so I didn't complete the ninth grade, and I got a high school equivalency. I went to a community college and got the first of 5 degrees, and so I have a 2-year degree in business, 4-year degree in criminal justice, a master's in political science from Virginia Tech, a PhD from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And with that PhD, I went to Princeton. I earned early tenure and I was on the faculty. And after about a decade, I went back to school and got a master's in law from Yale. And I can say that I did not have a plan. I never thought I would become a university professor. And as a person of faith, I believe that God has always ordered my footsteps, and He took me places that no one in my family had gone. And I can say that most of my life I was shy. It's not a career I would have purposefully chosen.
Well, that is incredible. What a great inspiration to people who struggle and may have had difficult in their schooling. So I'm very impressed. That must have taken part of your life to achieve all of that. But what a wonderful tribute it is to those of us who now admire your work and your knowledge and your academic career.
I was very committed, so once I focused, it took about 9 years of my life to get my education. That's not a whole lot in the larger scheme of things. But that what I did is possible for anyone, and that my story is not a Black story, it's an American story of attainment of the American dream because of the people who came into my life, and they steered me in that direction. Coming from the kind of poverty I came from, I didn't even know about becoming a university professor. And I was working at warp speed because I had a family. I had children, and I wanted to be able to support them, and you couldn't do that. I needed to be in a job that was paying. That was my motivator.
So you've witnessed firsthand the evolution in higher education and the pervasive influence of critical theories within academia. Could you share some examples of how you've encountered this in your career?
I mean, it's everywhere, but I can tell you that I sort of divide the world into pre-Obama, post-Obama. And during the time I was in graduate school or while I was at Princeton, there were courses in philosophy and seminars, many things about postmodernism and critical race theory and various ideologies that relate to critical theory, but it was not everywhere. But I would say after President Obama's election, it permeated the entire university in a way that there was no need for people to say, I'm a Marxist professor, because it was deeply rooted in everything. And we saw it seep down into K through 12. And it actually started reaching schools of ed in the 1970s. But what I saw was an environment where the speech codes became stricter. That you were expected to have trigger warnings, personal pronouns, safe spaces, and there was a concern about microaggressions. It became a very different environment. And then clearly the people that were steeped in critical theory graduated from school, and they took their ideas into the workplace. So whether they were a teacher or worked for a corporation or a church, all of those ideas from the left went into the workspaces.
Well, that makes a lot of sense about how it permeated the culture because, my focus has primarily been on education and focused on K-12. And I knew that the colleges of education were teaching this and it influenced the teachers. But you're saying it was throughout the colleges and universities and all disciplines. So that's how it was incorporated into all phases of our life here in America. That makes a lot of sense.
Well,
So,
it also like it because of the way it permeated everything, it started showing up in the math and the hard sciences, in medicine, in law. That's where it kind of started from. The whole idea of critical race theory and intersectionality, but it has permeated every sector of our society, and today we see it in the diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is everywhere.
so you use two terms that our viewers probably, or some may and some may not know. Can you tell us what microaggressions and intersectionality are?
Well, microaggression is a perceived insult with the emphasis on perceived. You didn't actually do anything to me, but you looked at me in a way that made me feel uncomfortable. You asked me where I was from. You asked me in the store, "May I help you?" And I think you did that because of my race, my gender, my sex, or whatever. And so it's a perceived threat. It's not something that actually happened that you can point to. And it can be anything that's in anyone's imagination. And intersectionality is the argument that people that have, if you belong to a marginal group, that what they call a marginalized group, if you are black, female, from poverty, who is a lesbian, then you have a greater moral authority because you have all these intersecting sources of disadvantage. And your lived experience, your experiences in life carry more weight than science and history and just all of these things. Your moral authority is greater. And that's one reason why racial and ethnic minorities and members of the LGBT community, whatever marginalized group you want to name, they believe that their voices should carry more weight because they've had a lived experience that a heterosexual white person, male or female, has not had. But the intersectionality is that you have overlapping and multiple sources of disadvantage, and that gives you greater moral authority.
Well, that was very clearly explained. I appreciate that. And I hadn't heard that clear of a definition before, so I appreciate it as well. So all of this plays into the woke agenda in the colleges and universities. And I've talked with you before about the Marxist critical theories, and most people have only heard of critical race theory. You want to talk about the other critical Marxist theories and how they're applied in subjects like math or reading, and how it's crossed over into nearly every discipline?
Well, first of all, for anyone who doesn't understand critical theory or critical race theory, I would recommend my 2001 co-authored book, Black Eye on America, how critical race theory is burning down the house, and the house is America. And in that book, we explain, where it came from, how it impacts our society, how it got into K through 12 education, and how to fight back. And so there are many strategies, and there's a glossary, and that's a good place for people that really want to understand what happened. And it doesn't take that much time for someone to invest to become educated on those issues. James Lindsay, who wrote a book called Cynical Theories, and he's written several other books. He's spoken all across the country. He has very much explained how the universities, brought all this stuff into the culture. And it's rooted in cultural Marxism, and cultural Marxism grows out of economic Marxism and Karl Marx. And what we see is that they followed the long march through the institutions, and every institution, whether it's the church, the family, the government, our schools, you go down the list, marriages, go down the list, and their whole goal has been to deconstruct, take apart, deconstruct, your faith, deconstruct your marriage, deconstruct, your job, deconstruct anything that's stable, but they have nothing to replace it with. And so it's not just about race; it's also about pitting rich against poor, males against females, heterosexuals against homosexuals, Jews against Palestinians. All of this stuff is part of the same game. Whites against blacks. All white people are considered privileged oppressors. Regardless of where they came from, they are all considered as having value in their white skin. And they can be, as poor as a church mouse, but it's argued that they are more privileged than the richest black person alive, than Oprah, or someone that's a black billionaire. And all racial and ethnic minorities or women or whatever the marginalized group is, they are seen as oppressed, a victim. And so it's very much about victims versus oppressors. And for white people, the critical race theory argues that every white person is a racist. Doesn't matter whether or not their families were abolitionists and never fought against slavery or never owned slaves because they came to America after slavery ended. Doesn't matter. Because you're white, you're perceived to be a racist. And part of the argument that's so ludicrous is that only whites can be racist. Yet we see that the worst forms of racism today comes from racial and ethnic minorities. If they were held to the same standard, racism might go away. But racism doesn't go away because there's a double standard, and people seem to take it for granted that racial and ethnic minorities cannot be racist. They seem to be leading the way in racism, as far as I can see.
So what do you think the agenda and the end game is with that? I mean, with it being Marxist in origin, is there a political agenda?
Well, the Marxism that we see in America is part of a worldwide agenda related to Karl Marx's vision. And so those people believe that a communist society would be better. And socialism is like one step along the way. And we saw the America under Obama, Biden move closer towards socialism. And with the Trump administration, we have high hopes, that some of this stuff will be reversed. But at the same time, the people who are educated in that administration, many of them have degrees from elite institutions. Many of them are also steeped in Marxism, and they may not talk about it and use the same language. We have to change the hearts and minds of people, and the only thing that will do that is a revival. You cannot put your faith in politicians. Like the Trump administration gives us a lot of hope. But at the end of the day, the Bible tells us not to put our trust in men. And the only way that you keep America moving in the right direction and maybe restore America to a place that we recognize, you have to change the hearts and minds of people. And that can only be done by God and through revival.
Well, amen to that. I totally agree. And of course, you're right. We have a lot of optimism thanks to the bold moves of President Trump. But we know, of course, he only has 4 years. And who knows what comes next. And for some
It's not just that. He has a Republican Congress that is unreliable. He has people, everyone that he's appointing in positions that are getting confirmed, they're not necessarily who they appear to be. Some of them are great. Some of them are not so great. And so we don't put our hope in men, and not even Trump. Like, I believe that God, anointed Trump. He's positioned him. He's protected Trump. But at the end of the day, Trump is still a man. And anyone who has read the Old Testament, a Christian believer, think about the kings that God called righteous. All the righteous kings, they would have that little but He did not tear down the high places. But none of them fully did what they were supposed to do. But God declared them righteous. And so with Trump, his heart is in the right place. He's making a lot of great decisions. But at the end of the day, we know that Washington is a viper pit and that he is surrounded by vipers outside of the White House and the administration, but they have a way of working their way in the inside.
Those are all very good points. I appreciate that. And so, it reminds me when you talk about revival, I'm reading a book by Eric Metaxas, A Letter to the American Church.
Yes.
It's an amazing read, and it's so timely. Actually, I'm a little late to the game. I think it was published 2 years ago, but I did learn that he's doing a follow-up book. So his book is incredibly timely, I believe, because of where we are and the things that you just emphasized. And the churches, I think, have neglected in a large way a responsibility to speak out and speak the truth and expose the lies that are being taught to children and being accepted in our culture. Do you agree?
I agree. And there's a young lady named Megan Basham, and she has a book. I believe the title is Shepherds for Sale, but it's about, and she talks a lot about some of the people that have been leaders in the Southern Baptists, just how compromised some of these people are. They were getting money from USAID, and they were really propped up, by the left. And so we have a problem within the church, but that should be expected because part of the Marxist strategy is to go into an organization, infiltrate it. They use deception to get in. And then once they get power, they manipulate. And so that's what's taking place. And people need to look at their churches and look at their pastors and look at their leaders, because there's a lot of progressivism within the church communities. And that's another reason why our society is not thriving.
All right, so we need to take a short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask you something about what's taking place in the state of Iowa regarding new requirements for teaching historical documents in K-12 curriculum. I'll be back with my interview with Dr. Carol Swain right after this. Government schools do not like boys. Boys are just too active, so they need to be medicated. Boys have budding, quote-unquote, toxic masculinity, so they must be belittled with narratives of being oppressors. Simply put, boys are being punished just for being boys. Young American men are in crisis. Research shows that poor school experiences are strongly linked to major challenges later in life, including physical and mental health issues, addiction, and crime. Today, fewer young adult men are settled into permanent jobs, and fewer men are married with children. With men in positions of authority dressed as women, role models have become confusing at best. U.S. Parents Involved in Education is sounding the alarm. Save our boys. Save our country. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and today I'm joined by Dr. Carol Swain. I recently read an article in the Federalist that reported on the state of Iowa's new K-12 social studies curriculum, which will require teaching students important historical and founding documents like the Mayflower Compact, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, and the Emancipation Proclamation. But the author of this article was concerned that Stephanie Wager, the Standards and Practices Consultant overseeing its implementation, has a background in DEI and even supports the 1619 Project. Dr. Swain, do you think this is a concerted effort to influence how these historical documents are presented in the classroom?
Well, that would worry me a lot if someone with that background was the one that was going to interpret the original documents. And I can also say that in the Trump administration, there has been a promise and even steps towards dismantling the Department of Education. But as we speak, the deputy secretary has not been confirmed, and the woman Penny Schwim, who's been nominated to be deputy secretary, she is a DEI, CRT supporter. She didn't enforce the laws while she was in Tennessee. She was the commissioner of education. And so I wonder a lot about how it's going to work with her helping to dismantle the Department of Education. The number 2 person is actually a person that does all the work, when she actually is a big proponent of DEI and CRT. So that's another reason why you can't just put your faith in the way things appear. And with the Department of Education, for it to be fully eliminated, it's going to take congressional action. But let me get back to your question. The writer of that article in the Federalist had every reason to be concerned, because if you have someone that has a Marxist base and grounding, why would you trust them to implement something that is just totally antithetical to everything they believe? They don't believe America is a great country. They think it's a terrible country.
Well, that reminds me of the point that we often make, about President Trump's agenda. Part of his education platform is to require patriotism be taught in the schools. So while we would all like to see that happen, I would love for our children to be taught to be patriotic and to love their country again. And we know the opposite is happening. We have teachers who have been through these colleges of education that are steeped in the anti-American propaganda. So how can you expect them to teach patriotism to children? Won't that be a problem too?
They don't understand patriotism, but if education is returned to the states, every state is going to be different. And so in the red states, the kids will get the patriotism. They may, I'm not going to say they will, they may get a better crop of teachers. But in the blue states, I doubt very much if you get more than what we already have. But federalism is supposed to work like that. States are independent. They're like laboratories. Some states will get it right. A lot of states will continue to get it wrong.
Right, exactly. And so what I like to tell people too is that the government closest to the people governs best. Of course, I'm not sure who that quote is from, but it fits perfectly when you talk about restoring local and parental control of education. So, removing the federal government's influence, then you have the state government that's much closer to the people. And then you've got your local communities and your school boards, and parents and community members can be far more effective in lobbying for the curriculum and things that they would like to see their children learn. Locally with their local school board, they can be far more effective.
Critical race theory sorts people into race-based groups, and government schools are teaching children that people of color are the oppressed and white people are the oppressors. In other words, individuals must be judged based on the color of their skin. In United States Parents Involved in Education's film, Truth and Lies in American Education, Dr. Carol Swain explains that Martin Luther King's dream was that we would be judged by the content of our character rather than the color of our skin. The consequences of judging people this way, Dr. Swain explains, is that as Americans, we lose the basis of unity as members of one human race. Dr. Martin Luther King's vision was for us all to come together. We were brothers and sisters. But according to critical race theory, we can never come together as one. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education, and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and today I'm joined by Dr. Carol Swain. Here at USPI, we've published a blueprint to close the U.S. Department of Education, along with a blueprint to establish state control of education. Dr. Swain, what are your thoughts on President Trump's recent comments about closing the Department of Education?
I would say that he is saying the right things, and the early action suggests that if they don't demolish it, they will cripple it. But I can also tell you that I was disappointed when a Secretary of Education was nominated and there were other people hired and appointed, because I felt like if you're going to dismantle an agency, that you send in 10 people with a charge to have it done in a year, and that you don't just treat it as an everyday agency. Now, I realize that maybe he had to do that because the Department of Education was created by Congress, and he can cripple it, but it would be very difficult to totally abolish it without legislative action. And they don't have the votes in the Senate to actually get rid of the Department of Education.
Well, I think you're probably right about that. And I'm really hopeful that some of that might change in the midterms. But in the meantime, the Secretary of Education has been charged with putting herself out of a job, is how President Trump puts it. So I think what they've done, obviously DOJ has been in there. I heard Secretary McMahon speak yesterday about the layoffs, and DOJ went in there and showed them, what you can get rid of without an act of Congress. So, the programs that are in statute that have to be removed by Congress before it can be closed would still be intact, but all of the other unnecessary functions that aren't instituted in law could be closed. So I believe that's what they're doing. And I agree with you that it's going to be a challenge with Congress, but we are hopeful, and we're hopeful that the American people are going to have enough support behind this platform promise to close the Department of Ed. Because Dr. Swain, ever since it was instituted, we've had politicians saying they're going to close it.
The Department of Education has not done anything beneficial to help America's school children. In fact, they've done much worse since that department came into existence.
You're exactly right. The goals of the department, the reason it was instituted, have never been achieved, and things have only gotten worse. And the bill to the taxpayers just gets higher and higher every year. I think we're at $80 billion a year just to fund the department itself. That doesn't go for all of the subsidies and things that come through the laws that are passed and are implemented through the U.S. Department of Education. So we're talking about a lot of money, even though it's one of the smaller federal agencies. And we also know, Dr. Swain, that there are mandates on education that come through other federal agencies. So there'll be that to wrestle with as well. The Department of Agriculture handles the free and reduced lunch programs. And so all of these things can't be nearly as efficient as they could be if they're being run by states that opted to have these programs, kept enough of their taxpayers' funding within their state to create their own programs, instead of taxpayers sending their money to DC and the bureaucrats siphoning off the majority of it and sending pennies back to the states with their mandates and regulations. So ultimately, it will improve education, and it will be more efficient should we return control back to the states. But you and I both agree it's not going to be easy, and it'll probably take some time. So I think wait and see is probably a really smart attitude. So this has been a really great conversation, Dr. Swain. And before I let you go, I'd like to ask you two questions that I ask all my guests. So what is your greatest concern about American education, and what are some of the things you're optimistic about?
Well, my greatest concern about American education is that in those states where the voucher programs are being put in place, school choice, I believe every parent should be able to choose their child's education, and some of them may choose public school, but they should have a choice between public, private, home, charter, go down the list. But I fear that the public schools will be just totally neglected and will become a wasteland. And there are some parents that are so poor that their children don't have choice. And so my fear is that those of us who have resources will forget about those that are left behind. And I think as long as we pay taxes to support public schools, everyone should have a vested interest in the children in their community, and they should be involved in the public schools even if that child is not there.
Our organization shares some concerns about the school choice voucher programs. They're a little different than your concerns. We're concerned that once government money goes into private and home schools, and the governments will begin controlling them.
Well, of course,
And
that always happens. That's a legitimate concern. It's
right.
a very legitimate concern.
Yes. So we agree about that. And then, I've had some guests on the podcast who are really believe that government teaching our children was a mistake to start with.
It may have been a mistake, but there are parents that obviously they can't teach their kids at home because they're not educated themselves. And so there needs to be something in place, whether they're church schools and private schools that pick them up, but there needs to be something in place. And whatever changes that come out of the Trump administration and the dismantling or crippling of the Department of Education, it's going to take a lot of years before you actually see the result.
You're absolutely right. So I agree, and I'm glad that you made that point, that there really needs to be some sort of a safety net for those families who can't afford the choices that some other families can make. So that's a very valid point you've made.
When you listen to what people are actually saying, and those are my people that are talking, they don't realize, because they don't come from poverty, they don't see the whole picture, that there are some parents that don't have educational freedom. They will never have school choice, because to have school choice, you got to be on the ball. You have to have either education or you have to have resources, or both. And so those people exist, and they are white and black and Hispanic and a cross section of America. So we can't pretend that they're not out there and that they're going to have the same choice as the people who are activists.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So let's get to the other question, and that is, what are you optimistic about?
I am optimistic about the fact that God gave America a reprieve. He gave us time to get it right. And so whatever happens during the Trump administration, that'll be great. But for America, I think every Christian, every believer should be praying for revival, that it will take changing the hearts and minds of Americans before you see changes at the local government. I live in Nashville. That is a blue state. They're as leftist as you can get. And I don't trust them to handle education unless we have different people elected at the local level. So you have to change the hearts and minds of people so that they know that it's why personal pronouns, that we don't want to do that, or what's wrong with having a trans teacher, and all of these things that we fight over in politics. We need to have a value system and a worldview that's based on traditionalism, I would say.
Well, again, I say you're right, and that's a great perspective, and I will join you, and I'll ask my viewers to also join in prayer for revival. It is certainly what this country needs, and you make an excellent point about the reprieve that God has granted us. So thanks again, Dr. Swain, for being on the podcast, and thank you, audience, for listening and supporting our work. Join me again next week for another episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, U.S. PI seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional U.S. PI chapter in your area, please visit uspi.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.